What's going on, everybody? It is the one and only Q from Retro Q Gaming back at it again. And, well, today, Microsoft have taken a massive, big information dump right all over the internet. And they've gone kind of crazy and kind of really over the top with it when it comes to new Xbox news. And we're going to look a little bit about that here today because, well, this ties in with something I said recently, which we'll touch on towards the end of the video. Anyway, I'm going to try keep it as jargon free as possible, and I'm not going to go into the super nitty gritty, but I'm going to talk about the overall specs and what they mean and stuff that they've talked about and what they've shown off so far at least. So, we all know that the Xbox is due out at 2020 holiday season, so you're probably looking at maybe November based on my guess if it doesn't get delayed. But anyway, we have the CPU. It is an 8-core CPU clocked at 3.8 GHz using AMD's custom Zen 2 CPU architecture. It has a 12 teraflop GPU, or specifically a 12.15 teraflop GPU, 52 compute units at 1.825 GHz, custom RDNA 2 GPU architecture from AMD. 16 gigabytes of GDDR6, which is very good and very new. Internal storage of 1 terabyte using a custom NVMe SSD. It currently has expandable storage, which we'll talk about a little bit later, as well as external storage support, which is very important to differentiate between expandable storage. Again, we'll touch on that a little bit later. Naturally, it has an optical Blu-ray drive that has support for 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray movies and 100GB discs. So, when the likes of Final Fantasy VII Remake comes to Xbox, it'll all be on one disc. And typically it's going to have a performance target of 4K 60 FPS, and they've said that it can run at up to 120 FPS at either lower quality settings or lower resolution. So, presumably if you have like a 1080p screen or something like that. But really, people, you shouldn't be using modern hardware with such an incredibly old school resolution. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about the stuff that they have showed off so far. We've already talked about smart delivery in multiple different videos before, but we'll touch on it ever so slightly just now again. So with smart delivery, you will get the best and most up-to-date version of your game available on the hardware you have available. So for example, if you're playing a Xbox game, it will download the Xbox version of the game. If you're playing a backwards compatible version of the game that is Xbox One X enhanced, it will download the Xbox One X enhanced version of the game. They showed off a little bit of the quick resume feature as well, which is more of an expanded version on what we have now with the likes of the Xbox One and PS4. You know, when you're playing a game and you press the home button, you go back to the dashboard, your game kind of just suspends and you can go straight back to it. It's basically like that, but now on the Xbox, you can do it with multiple games at the same time. Typically, they've said using Xbox games, they will have support for maybe 3 to 4 games at once, but with the likes of backwards compatible games from Xbox One or something prior, since those are more resource light, you can actually have more of them suspended all at once. Something that's very important to note when it comes to backwards compatibility as well is that it does have the same backwards compatibility data that the Xbox One has. So if you have an OG Xbox 180 game, an Xbox 360 game that both play on the OG, well, I suppose you couldn't even call it OG, but they play it on the Xbox One, they will all work properly on this Xbox. Just like the backwards compatibility with Xbox One games also working on this Xbox. Now, something that's very important to mention as well when it comes to backwards compatibility is even if they don't go out of their way to enhance it for the Xbox, be it an Xbox One game, a 360 game, or an OG Xbox 180 game, even if they don't go back and specifically engineer it for backwards compatibility and upgraded everything and all on this Xbox, the way the hardware is designed, it will automatically boost all of that up. It won't override a hard frame rate cap of 30 FPS, but if the game has an uncapped version or it's capped at 60 FPS but varies wildly, and not to mention the huge resolution boost that you'll get from all of this. And because pretty much everything will be playing in 4K in some way, shape or form, for some of the older stuff, it has something built into it that's basically, think of it as auto HDR. So it uses AI algorithms and learning and whatnot to think of where HDR would be and to augment it using that. So you could play an OG Xbox 180 game through backwards compatibility on your Xbox, and you will get some approximation of HDR output. And again, this is all at a system level, so it should, in theory, apply across the board for pretty much everything. Now, a quick important one that I want to mention as well is that they did give a very brief demo, if you will, a very brief benchmark of just what to expect when it comes to this Xbox. For this, they used Gears 5 as the working example. So what they did is they took a small team within the Coalition, worked with Epic Games because of the engine, and in the course of about 2 weeks, they gave a very, very unoptimized, semi-ported version over to get it running on this Xbox. Now, this one is not optimized. It's not designed to use any of the new fancy technologies or anything in this Xbox and the new hardware. It just kind of gave the raw grunt and the raw output, if you will. It basically brute forced it. They ran the benchmark of Gears 5, and it was running between 60, that's right, 60 on a console, to 100 frames per second. This was apparently running at the equivalent to ultra settings on the PC, also at 4K by the way. But I do want to add one little bit of a caveat in there too. They did say it's running at ultra settings. It's unclear what exactly they meant, because there is an ultra setting on Gears of War 5. However, many of those settings go above ultra in Gears 5. Do they mean maxed out, or do they just mean everything at ultra? Regardless, it's still fairly impressive. What's that? Q is praising console hardware? We'll talk about that a little bit later. Because right now we're going to talk a little bit about storage. Now you might remember when I was talking about storage and listing the features of the storage here, we have a 1TB internal custom NVMe SSD. So naturally, this is going to be extremely fast. When you look at the speed, the input, output, or specifically the read-write speeds of this NVMe drive, it is currently up there with some of the higher-end PC drives, which are very expensive. But you might remember that I listed there was 2 different extra versions of storage when it came to this Xbox. There was expandable storage and external storage. And now we're going to talk a little bit about both of those. So with the likes of this 1TB drive inside this Xbox, we all know that a large chunk of that will be taken up by the OS. You're probably going to lose maybe 100, 150 gig between how drives are formatted and the OS itself. And given the fact that thankfully games are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and will have higher quality assets and higher quality everything, you can probably assume that even the smallest game on this Xbox is going to be about 50 or 60 gigabytes. You can probably assume that most of them, the standard ones or at least the ones they want to show off, will be closer to the 100 gigabyte mark. Which means you will only be able to store a handful of games on here at one time, especially when you take into consideration things like patches, DLC, updates, whatnot, stuff like that. You're going to lose even more space. So because it is a very, very specific custom internal NVMe SSD, it's not as simple as just opening, say, your PS4 and sliding a new drive in. So Microsoft have shown off something that came up when the first leaked version of the console was done. Everyone saw an extra slot on the back, and a lot of people apparently confirmed, or at least reported at the time, I believe myself included based on the info I was given, that it was supposedly a debugging port. Well, it turns out that it's not a debugging port at all, and it's used for expandable storage. Now, not just any type of regular expandable storage. This uses very specific and, more importantly, proprietary expansion cards, as they call them. Currently, they've only been listed as being available in 1TB capacities, and this is basically an exact replica of the internal 1TB SSD. So basically you can plug one of these in, install a couple of games onto it, play them directly off it because your input-output read-write speeds are going to be exactly the same. So that's the only way to properly expand the internal storage. Now this has a couple of positives and negatives. One extra one is you can install a bunch of games to it and then technically, in theory, just bring it to another room or to your friend's home or whatever, and you have all your installed games ready to play straight off it. Also very important is that even though it is expandable storage, it still runs at the same speed as the internal SSD, so you're not going to suffer any performance losses or anything. Think of when you might have ran a game off an external hard drive on the PS4 or Xbox One. They were typically slower and had to use an extra step via the USB. So you might be wondering what the negatives for this whole thing could be. Well, we've seen this multiple times over. The Nintendo Switch, the PlayStation Vita. Proprietary storage media is usually more expensive than it should be. A good 1TB NVMe SSD will probably set you back anywhere from $100 to $150. But given all this is proprietary stuff, don't expect this to come cheap. A high speed, very, very high speed at that, proprietary 1TB NVMe SSD is going to cost you a pretty penny. Now, of course, unlike the Vita and unlike the Switch in many ways, these are not 100% required. You do have enough internal storage to play any game on the system, which cannot be said for the likes of the Switch. So you might be wondering what the other one that we talked about is, external storage. So yes, there is still support for USB up to 3.2 external hard drive support. Now, there's a big caveat with this, as you would expect. So considering that hard disk drives, mechanical hard disk drives, and not just regular SSDs, are considerably slower by a factor of between 40 to 60, depending on the drives considered, there are some limitations by using external USB storage, even if it's an external USB SSD. So if you do use a USB drive, you can install and play OG Xbox 180 games off it. You can install and play Xbox 360 games off it. You can install and play Xbox One games off it. But you cannot install and play Sexbox games off it. However, you can use it as kind of backup storage, if you will. So you don't have to download another maybe 120 gigabytes for whatever game it is. If your internal drive fills up, you can just copy it to your external drive. You cannot play it off that, as we already mentioned. But then when you free up some space, or maybe you're going to a friend's house or whatever, you can copy it back off that external drive quicker than you would be able to re-download it. But outside of mass storage, just like I explained there, you should in no way, shape or form be looking to use an external mechanical hard disk drive with these systems whatsoever. Now, what's the purpose of this whole video? As I mentioned, Q praising console hardware. Well, this ties back into the video I made a week or two ago, whenever it exactly was, I don't remember. But it was when I wanted to make consoles great again. And based on what we had seen and what we were told about in the meantime, when it comes to the next generation of consoles with the Xbox and the PlayStation 5, I was uncharacteristically optimistic that they could do this. After all, I do consider the 7th and 8th generation of consoles the two hands down worst generations ever that completely damaged the industry. And it completely sank console gaming to all-time lows. Prior to that, for 2 decades, I was playing games properly designed around hardware with proper playable frame rates at the same time. Then suddenly this comes along, it simplifies everything down and cuts the frame rate in half, or down to a third. And then of course, yes, there is illogically the people defending all of this. But, because unlike the 7th and 8th generation of consoles, they do not use laughably underpowered hardware, we have the potential for the next generation, the 9th generation, at least from Sony and Microsoft. Lord knows Nintendo's 9th generation of console is a joke. But these consoles have the potential. I'm not going to say the capacity because, well, we don't know until we have real world experience with them. Marketing is a hell of a thing. But like I said, they have the potential to bring this back, to bring the quality back, to bring the playable experience back, and not just be an absolute laughable shit show. Console gamers, if this all turns out to be true, I welcome you back to being great again. I welcome you back from obscurity. I welcome you back from the shadows, from the valley of low frame rates, from the dungeon of lowest quality settings. And that makes me very, very happy. Signed, your boy Q, a PC gamer. Oh, you can stop defending 30 FPS now, by the way. remember, I told you so.